Pleasure to be back at the Lamb Library. This evening I'm going to speak for about 5 minutes by way of introduction. Then Mary-Clare is going to present. So Mary-Clare joins us from Vienna in front of a very beautiful Australian Aboriginal painting. And then Professor Jaynie Anderson. Jaynie will speak for about 15 minutes as well, and then we'll have time for some audience questions. I came to the subject of the Dunera by way of Ken Inglis, the great Australian historian. And Ken came to his interest in the Dunera by way of Queen's College at the University of Melbourne, where he lived and studied as a young man. It was 1947 when Ken Inglis left home for the University of Melbourne. He had earned himself 2 scholarships. One subsidised a Bachelor of Arts and the other covered meals and board at Queen's. For a callow 17-year-old, and callow was Ken's word, not mine, for a callow 17-year-old from Preston in the northern suburbs of Melbourne, Queen's was a thrilling new world. Under Dr. Leonhard Johnson, Master of the College from 1934, Queen's had become the most diverse and international of the university's colleges, a home to staff and students from beyond Melbourne and Methodism. At Northcote High and Melbourne High, Ken had been aware of students from overseas, but most of these refos, to use the idiom of the day, lived and studied beyond his Anglo-Celtic social circle. Not so at Queen's, which in the 1940s was home to 3 men from the Dunera, George Durheim, George Nadel and Leonhard Adam. European and exotic for it, they represented a new and different kind of person for Ken. Durheim sat next to the master and other staff in the annual college photo, though he was a student. In these photos he looks forlorn and older than his age. He had come to the university in Queen's in 1943, aged 35. His place at Queen's was tribute to Leonhard Johnson's worldly interests and religious pluralism. Durheim was a Roman Catholic, classified Jewish by the Nazis, living in a Methodist institution. He hoped to finish the medical degree he had very nearly completed in his native Vienna. George Nadel was born in Vienna in 1923. Ken remembered Nadel as intellectually brilliant. Nadel achieved first-class honours in history in 1948, a golden year in a golden age for Melbourne history, then decamped to Harvard. He founded the scholarly journal History and Theory, published to this day. Isaiah Berlin and Raymond Aron were among its first contributors. Dr. Leonhard Adam arrived at Queen's in 1942, his release from internment arranged by charitable organisations sympathetic to the plight of the Dunera internees. 50 years old, he had served the Kaiser in the First World War and had enjoyed a successful career as a legal scholar and judge in the Weimar Republic. In the years before the Second World War, he left the law for anthropology, building a reputation as an expert on what was then known as primitive art, and it was in this capacity that he was employed at the university. Ken remembers him sitting erect and proud at high table, a dignified figure. Of these 3 men, I suspect it was Adam who most piqued Ken's interest in the Dunera. 65 years later, when Ken came to write his histories of the Dunera, he made sure to include Leonhard Adam. Indeed, my memory tells me that Adam was the first man he wrote about. This scholarly endeavour led Ken to a friendship with Mary-Clare, Leonhard's daughter, and one of our guests tonight. Through correspondence and a rich interchange of information and ideas, Ken discovered that Mary-Clare is a wonderful informant and custodian of her parents' story. And I use custodian in a positive sense, for Mary-Clare shares, she never keeps. Anyone who meets Mary-Clare learns quickly of her generosity. I am thrilled that she and Professor Jaynie Anderson, another warm and encouraging scholar, join us tonight. Professor Anderson is an internationally famous art historian, so we are in esteemed company.
Don't be silly.
That's not being silly. She's very famous and very lovely. Over to you, Mary-Clare. Welcome.
Mary-Clare, before you start talking, can you see well enough? Do you want us to move you, the camera, so you can see better, or are you okay?
I can see okay, but the sound isn't so clear where I am.
Okay.
I don't know if you can bring up the sound to my particular camera somehow.
I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure.
We can hear you very
Can you
clearly,
hear
Mary
me
Claire.
clearly though?
Yes, you're very clear to us.
Okay, so we'll leave it as it is.
And if you can't hear something, let us know, okay?
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much, Seumas, for that introduction. I want to begin by thanking you and Mirav for enabling this event to take place and giving me this opportunity to speak about the work of my father. And I also want to thank Jaynie, actually my friend from school days, as it happens, for sharing her knowledge, her vast knowledge in the art field, and for commenting on the art side of my father's life. Can we begin with the first slide? Thank you.
Yes, we have it. Yeah.
So I don't see it, but okay, so,
It's your father.
all right. But okay, it's all right. So the first one should be a portrait of my father.
Yes.
Yes. Now that portrait is very different to the one that you all saw in that, the flyer about this evening's program, because the one on the flyer is the only one I ever saw with my father without a tie. And that one was done, or he did in Tatura. And he just looks completely different from this particular one that you can see, which is only 2 years after that first one. But he was already, this was in late 1942, he was already living at Queen's College when he painted that particular one. Can we have the next one, please?
Yes.
You'll have to tell me when it's on there because
It's
I
on
don't
now.
see it.
It's on.
Sierra Leone.
Okay. So this is an extremely interesting painting. I think it's the only known one done on board the Dunera. And it is the coast of Sierra Leone as the Dunera proceeded down that coast of West Africa. And for me, it's terribly interesting because it shows that my father was able to smuggle onto the ship some watercolors and some paper for painting. Because, as you probably all know, the ghastly story of when the internees were put on the ship, how they were robbed of almost everything they had, and certainly all the things most precious to them. Yet somehow he managed to get these watercolors onto the ship. So this is a very rare painting, which I have here in Vienna with me, as a matter of fact. The next one, please.
Yes, it's up.
Okay, the next one is the quarry at Waranga Basin. Very often, several times a week, the internees were taken out on a truck to the Waranga Basin quarry to quarry for stones and bring stones back to the internment camp. And they used those stones for building various things in the camp, such as the monument to the victims of the Arandora Star. The Arandora Star was a ship that had left Liverpool just before the Dunera, and it was torpedoed and sunk, and many, many people drowned. But quite a number of people were rescued and taken back to Liverpool and put on the Dunera, although they were told they were never going to be put on another ship. But so a few days later, back on the Dunera. Now, in Tatura camp, the internees went to Waranga Basin quarry. They took the stones and they built a wonderful memorial. In this painting, you see just a corner at the top left-hand corner, the stones. That's the bottom of the memorial. I actually gave to Jura Museum the original painting where you see the entire memorial. But I thought this was rather lovely with the hollyhock to show you. Also, incidentally, I was at an exhibition in Vienna called Vienna 1900 a few years ago, and Kokoschka painted an incredible painting which he entitled The Sinking of the Arandora Star. And you see the ship sinking. Extremely powerful. Would be good to try and get a copy of that somehow. The next one, please. The next one, you see physical education. So every morning the internees had to do some sort of physical training with a trainer, of course. So the next three are all of the physical training. The first two are around about 10 in the morning. And then the third one is very early in the morning with a different light. Just gives you an idea of life in the camp. The next one, actually the next one and the next one are the same scene but at different times of the day. Now, my father was absolutely horrified that people could wantonly, he used the word murder, trees, ring barking the trees. He just couldn't believe it, because he told me that every tree has a spirit, has a soul, is like a person really. So that those people killed those trees on purpose, and he just couldn't get over it. And he did these two very beautiful paintings of the same scene, especially the next one, the one in the evening, I think, with the evening light is very beautiful. And then we come to where I grew up in Brighton in Melbourne, and we had a lovely house in Bay Street, very close to the sea. And this is a view of the back garden. And he planted all those little shrubs, and he planted many, many trees there. And the gate behind is the gate to our vegetable garden, which was also a large plot. And he planted lots of vegetables. And he really enjoyed working in the garden. That was his greatest relaxation. The next one shows the house itself, and in the front you can see, well, at the back of the house, in the foreground you see a merry-go-round. So that merry-go-round was hired by my parents for my 4th birthday party. And I do believe that Paulette Bancroft, who's in the audience, was most likely at this party, because we've known each other since we were 4 years old. Anyway, I just wanted to show you that because I think it's rather a lovely painting and very personal. And the next one is of our country cottage at Kalorama in the Dandenongs. He loved to go there. He loved the trees there, and he loved painting there, both of the house and the view from the house, which was quite extraordinary. And the next images are of some of his books, written in German, his early publications. The first one, Sitte und Recht in Nepal, about legal systems in Nepal, he did after his experience interviewing Nepalese Gurkha prisoners of war in World War I in an internment camp near Berlin, and also another one in Romania. The next picture, you see him, my father, and he's seated at a table, and he's interviewing a Gurkha prisoner with the interpreter sitting between them. Now there were so many Gurkhas, because as you know, the British Army employed thousands of Gurkhas in their army. and many, many ended up as prisoners of war of the Germans in World War One. So he gathered enough material to then write this book about legal systems in Nepal. The next book, Buddha Statues, was written much earlier, and his first interest, actually second interest, was Buddha statues and Hindu art. First interest was Northwest America, and unfortunately I don't have that first book of his. And the last one, Hochasiatische Kunst, also his early interest in Asiatic art. And of course, Chinese art. And when he was at university in Berlin, he studied Chinese in great depth, to such an extent that he could converse quite freely in Mandarin Chinese, and taught it on the Dunera, and also he taught Chinese in Tatura, and also he was the first person to teach Mandarin at the University of Melbourne. Now, Seumas had asked me about what my mother's connection was, how she met my father, and it's a very interesting story, so I included some images connected with her. This one shows the front cover of the Listener In, which was a magazine put out by ABC, the radio, Australian radio. So my mother was a pianist, and she'd studied with Arthur Schnabel and Wilhelm Backhaus in Germany and Italy and Switzerland. And she'd gone back to Australia for a concert tour, and also because Arthur Schnabel had gone to Australia on a tour, and she went to take more lessons from him in Sydney, and at the same time to be the secretary and accompanist to Theresa Schnabel, Arthur's wife, who was a wonderful lieder singer. So there was that side to my mother. Her sister, Helen Bailey, who was a well-known activist on behalf of Aboriginal rights, but also on behalf of general rights for many, many people, she founded the Refugee Internees Welfare Association, and my mother was the secretary of that association. As such, she had a permit to go into the internment camps. So she went into the internment camps, all of them, and she asked the internees what materials they might need to make life easier, and especially the ones who were teaching and the camp university in Tatura. She wanted to know whether she could help by getting materials, which she did. And my father, there are some letters, my father sending her a list of books he needed for his teaching, which she got. And then she'd always been interested, actually, in tribal art. Very interesting. So she ended up as one of his students at Queen's College, and of course the rest is history. So the next one is a flyer of hers where she gave a recital in London at Leighton Hall. And the next ones are just kind of gossipy things. Her photo from the paper, and then something about her and her mother. They loved driving. My mother loved driving. In fact, she went driving all through the Northern Territory in the 1930s. She drove herself. Anyway, there's something about their cars, their Vauxhall cars, when they lived in Camberwell, and there's a lovely picture of her standing beside her car and her mother behind her, and her mother's Vauxhall behind her Vauxhall, and their dear little dog. During World War II, my mother drove an ambulance for the Red Cross, And this is the certificate thanking her for her service to the Red Cross. Now, the next two are extremely interesting, and Seumas, I think, will be interested in these particularly. They are letters of thanks from, first of all, from Victor Menschel in Hay internment camp. He thanks my mother very much for supplying musical instruments for him and for the musicians in the camp, and enabling them to have concerts in the camp. And the other letter is from a very famous pianist called Peter Stadlen. My mother had heard him play in Berlin in the 1930s. He was an outstanding pianist, and she couldn't believe she found him interned in Hay. So there was some old bomb piano there, but not very good. So she succeeded in getting a very fine instrument sent to Peter Stadlen. And this is a lovely letter of thanks. And I'm concluding the presentation with a number of copies of my father's book, Primitive Art, which ironically was first published in 1940, so it appeared when the Dunera was on the high seas. So that's the original little penguin book you see with the blue and the white, the small book. And the other ones are various editions in various languages. The most recent translation is in Mandarin Chinese, and that was translated very few years ago. You can see the book in Chinese there. So I come to the end of my presentation, and I'd be delighted to answer any questions later on. And meanwhile, I look forward to hearing Jaynie's comments and observations on my father as a painter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary-Clare. And just before I hand over to Jaynie, I think one thing that you would have gathered from what Mary-Clare was saying was her father's sort of openness to the world and new cultures and ideas, and sort of a willingness to take on new experiences. And in the time I've known Mary-Clare, I'd say that was very much true of her too. She's a very warm and generous person, and I might also add, at the risk of embarrassing her, that she inherited her father's gift for languages. How many languages do you speak, Mary-Clare?
7.5.
So yeah, she's a quite remarkable, warm person. When I was travelling with my girlfriend, my now wife, in 2015, and we had arranged to meet Mary-Clare in Vienna, and she said, "Oh, Seumas, you must come for our wedding." And we weren't able to make it, but it's a sign of how sort of warm and generous a person she is, that she'd invite two close to strangers to her wedding. So it was a very happy memory that I have. I will now get Jaynie's PowerPoint up. I'll give you the clicker.
Okay.
And there'll just be a second.
Images of Leonhard Adam. The one on the left that Mary-Clare referred to, which was done at Tatura, when he's a bit of an Aussie bloke with his shirt open and no tie. And on the right, the very formal European intellectual view of him as a scholar with a bow tie and always in this pinstripe suit. And one of his best friends among the professors at the University of Melbourne was Joseph Burke. And I know there are people here tonight who were Joseph Burke's students, as I was. And there was an affinity between them. They stood out on the campus, two men in pinstripe suits, which was, I thought, a mark of, an intellectual who knew about European customs, rather than being an affectation at all. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the unceded land on which we work, learn and live, the Wurundjeri and Bunurong peoples. I hope that Leonhard Adam's continuing contribution to our knowledge about Indigenous culture will increase as we know more about him from the archival record, and hopefully with the biography that Mary-Clare and Robin Sloggett are producing together. In preparation for this talk, I also read some very good articles by the combined forces of Adam and Sloggett, and they were extremely good. And also, I think we're looking at an image of the installation of the Leonhard Adam Groote Eylandt barks, which was recently shown in this extraordinary exhibition that's just finished at the University of Melbourne, 64,000 Years of Australian Art. These works were commissioned, and I emphasize the word commissioned, in 1946 from the trader Fred Gray by Leonhard Adam. The critical reception of the Groote Eylandt barks is a complex thing, and it's tackled in the catalogue of 65,000 Years by Grazia Gunn. And she claims, when she organised an exhibition in 1973, to have first recognised the aesthetic value of these barks. But I think it's a more complicated story than that. And any of Leonhard Adam's early writings are all about the aesthetic values of Indigenous art. He makes it very clear that these are works that have an intrinsic value, beauty, aesthetic meaning, which is quite considerable. There we are. And here's a detail of one of the Groote Eylandt barks that meant a great deal to Sidney Nolan. And on the other side, an off-print that Leonhard Adam gave to Max Crawford, Professor of History, who had helped him get a job within the History Department at the University of Melbourne. And it's a detailed account, a really detailed account of their meaning, and seems to have been slightly ignored recently. Now, in my brief talk this evening, I want to make 4 points which I think are important. I'd like to emphasise the development of Leonhard Adam's lifelong interpretation of Australian Indigenous art from 1918, which is very early, until 1960. And I'd like to try and understand his best-selling masterpiece, Primitive Art, and the exhibitions at the National Gallery of Victoria in 1943 and 1955, which had a considerable impact on contemporary artists and people in Melbourne and elsewhere. Yeah, the other thing that sort of surprised me as I was going through the archival record, but really rather delighted me, was that in the Department of Fine Arts under Joe Burke, we had the first courses anywhere in the world about primitive art as an essential part of our art history development. Unfortunately, I missed out because I came to university only in 1962 after Leonhard Adam had died. But the impact was still there, and there's quite a lot of interesting material. And Joe says how he fired enthusiasm for this sort of study. And he taught also at Queen's College. And the other thing is that you've seen a few of his watercolours in Mary-Clare's presentation, but he is really quite a distinguished artist in the most difficult of mediums. And you can interpret these watercolours as a sort of diary of his personal life, as Mary-Clare did a bit in her presentation. But they're more than that, and they're highly, highly skilled. Now, these are quite ambitious aims for a very brief talk, but I'll try and do my best to outline a few ideas. His CV is, as you've seen, quite remarkable. As a kid, and I emphasize the word kid, he draws in the Berlin Ethnographic Museum, and later on he becomes a board member of the museum. And this is a display that's dated about 1914 of objects. And he goes there and he loves it. And it's now a part of the Humboldt Forum elsewhere in Berlin. But this is a quite extraordinary. How many of us have children who go and draw in museums ethnographic objects from the age of about 14? I mean, it's quite extraordinary. And right throughout his letters, he talks about his painting and his watercolors, and he studied with the pupils of Adolf Schlabitz, who's a portrait and genre painter in Berlin, and he had a school, and he had 2 students in the school, Leonhard Adam studied with both of them. Now, I think the watercolour on the, I've used a watercolour for comparison. The watercolour on the left is a sentimental view of the Austrian Tyrol. It's very nice, it's very charming. You might find it as an anodyne image on a hotel room. Whereas you see on the right, this is Leonhard Adam in 1911 painting Ragusa. Mary-Clare hinted about the high value of trees. He loves trees. They are animistic in all of his watercolours. And he's much more skillful and exciting and grabs you immediately as the viewer of his works. I won't go through the difference between the people who taught him, but you could find enough online to do that yourself. But I just want to emphasize the beauty and extraordinary skill of some of these pictures. There's been one exhibition years ago, which Mary-Clare wrote a bit for the catalogue for, but otherwise he's unknown, and he's a sort of artist because he's a private intellectual and the works remain in the family, or Mary-Clare has gifted them generously to museums like Tatura, where they remain in the basement. He is the sort of artist you could have a very interesting exhibition about. I don't think any ever came on the art market. So, you know, he's a person who, strange enough, in the way we value paintings, is without value. This is divine. The watercolour of a dust storm at Tatura. I mean, he's obviously aware, and I can see my colleague Anthony White here, who knows more about this sort of painting than I do, but he's obviously aware of the most interesting developments in France at this period, in post-impression, that sort of thing. So he's quite an extraordinary artist. And I mean, I could show you a lot more. I think he's into gum trees, like, no, he loves eucalyptuses. And these are two watercolours that I think are in Vienna with Mary-Clare. She mentioned the Ruanga Basin, and he went on a memorable trip to gather stone for the monument for the lost SS Andorra Star. And these are pictures that are they just really are exciting to look at. He's great with gum trees. Now, his first encounter with Indigenous art and Indigenous people was during the Second World War, when, as a German officer, he was asked to interview prisoners of ethnic origin within the framework of a questionnaire drawn up by Professor Joseph Kohler, his law professor and the founder of the legal journal, which Adam edited with him. And these interviews were recorded. There's a very learned article about them, all about corroborees. And he interviewed two people, but the person who meant the most to him was Roland Carter, whom you see on the left. This is an image from the Australian War Archives. Extraordinarily handsome man, and he's the same age as Leonhard Adam. But unfortunately, we don't have a picture of him with Leonhard Adam, which would be lovely, at least not that I found, but you never know. The archive he's left behind is quite considerable. But it's very interesting that he first of all encounters Indigenous art early on, and some of it's in the Ethnographic Museum in Berlin, and of course when he comes to England it plays a big part in the comparative material for primitive art. Well, we know the sad story that everything changed in Germany in 1933, so he was fired from his university position and from being a judge in Berlin. And he fled to England and was helped by colleagues. You can see that all the way through the correspondence, that whenever he met anyone, he must have been extraordinarily bright and intelligent, and everyone wanted to help him and promote him. So he had all these great friendships with people like Franz Boas at Columbia University. So when he came to England, he was looked after and treated very well. I'd like to quote a little bit from a CV that he wrote, which is much more interesting than most boring resumes that I might make about my life, for example. It sort of really told you quite a lot about him. And he says, "I was always good at sketching. My parents had organised private lessons for me with excellent teachers, Emmy Stahlmann and later Waldemar Blum. By 1907, I was in the final year of high school and had become a very skillful draftsman and painter in watercolour and oil. I was fully qualified to design my own ethnological picture atlas." Now, that doesn't survive, alas. but it brings to mind something that Abi Warburg, who's a great Jewish intellectual art historian, did something called the Atlas of Memory, the Builder Atlas Menesmene, in 1927, which is a cult object among art historians. And there's recently been an exhibition at the Uffizi of Abi Warburg and his images, and trying to reconstruct the importance of the Atlas of Memory. But I wonder whether this ethnographical picture atlas isn't behind primitive art, because I can see the extraordinary comparisons that go on there. This animism that's evident in his landscapes, I'm going to quote you, Mary-Clare, I hope it doesn't embarrass you, but I think there's a very interesting paragraph in Mary-Clare's brief essay about her father's painting when she says, "I believe that his lifelong involvement with primitive cultures made him an animist in thought and in deed. He was, for example, a passionate tree planter who related to each sapling as a person, thus instilling in me the belief that all living things have spirits. At night, pulling down the blinds, we would say good night to the spirits of the gardens. And since my father was also a convincing ventriloquist, I was not surprised when the spirits of the garden bid me good night as well." And I think that's the sort of feeling you get when you look at his the vibrancy of his images. And then he was interned, it seems by accident, on the Isle of Man. And I show the watercolour from the Isle of Man, which shows you a real prison. He's given it a Braque-like intensity. And then at the same time, he was also occasionally painting, oil painting. And this was a picture of roses and flowers that was returned to Mary-Clare by people who had inherited it from the Isle of Man camp many years later. But it shows you he's capable of doing very different things to a considerable standard of excellence. Then there's this book, Primitive Art. I had a copy of it as an undergraduate. I loved it. I think we wince at the title Primitive Art, but it has a real meaning, and I think he winced at it. But it does refer to arts of all culture from what was then called prehistory. We might now call it the dream time. I don't know what's quite the fashionable term for it at the moment, but it's early art and also art of diverse cultures. And the range is extraordinary. He is looking at all sorts of different cultures. And he does this from his own knowledge from the years in Berlin, but also from the fact that he was given free range, really, of the British Museum. And you can see he's comparing all sorts of different objects from different cultures. And what's very unusual about it, and some of us here have written books, and you think always of the visual component of the book as an argument in itself that reinforces the text. Well, this is true here, but what he's done is he copies everything, he draws everything. He doesn't, he's doing this year before the Second World War begins, and in quite difficult circumstances, you'd imagine, even though he has the resources of the British Museum. So how does he illustrate these books? And he illustrates them with his own drawings after photographs often. And this is quite unusual. This is a page about landscape, and I think this is a very personal page, although it's, of course, in a general book and isn't intended to be personal, but he does think landscape is the highest development of civilized painting, and he sees the indigenous Australians doing it. And here he's copying and drawing an image from a book by Baldwin Spencer, whom he knows before, as it were, through his books before he comes to Melbourne. And when he's in Melbourne, he does quite a lot with the collection in the Museum of Victoria, which was on show then. Losing my place here. So I think one of the successes of this book is the wide range of things he analyzes and compares. And I suspect behind it is this ethnographic atlas that he had already done, but which we don't know really because it doesn't survive. as an art historian, I'm quite fascinated by these illustrations. And so I just thought I'd show you the Venus of Willendorf, which is an image you probably all know very well. And in the middle, there's Leonhard Adam's drawing of it in his book. And on the left, a slide. And we have Jane Brown here tonight, who's our curator of our visual arts collection at the University of Melbourne. And she's found about 80 slides of Leonhard Adam, which I think relate to the lectures that we have in the archives. And then on the right is a really quite horrendous image from Wikipedia of the Venus of Willendorf in colour. So, I mean, years ago I participated in an experiment with Gombrich and a psychiatrist from Bristol University on what was the impact of looking at works of art only in black and white, and what was the impact of colour. And he said, oh, if you take out colour, it takes out the emotion. Well, when you look at the Venus in Willendorf on Wikipedia, she looks awful. But when she doesn't look like this image of fertility and all the sort of things that are attributed to her in Leonhard Adam's text. And I think some of the slides in our collection, and Jane probably having a better eye than I do, probably knows more about them, are drawings after things that he found elsewhere. Now, we've mentioned Queen's College. I'm a fellow at Queen's College, so it's particularly moving to me. It looks very different now, but the one on the right is a view from his rooms, so probably room 302 above where the master's lodgings are now, and an inscription in German saying that this is the view from his room. And these are some drawings. He did do drawings, quite a lot of drawings of officers, women officers lounging around the Queen's gardens. He's also meeting Mary-Clare's mother at this period. Now, I mentioned earlier on that I wanted to sort of claim a first for art history at the University of Melbourne. And these are lectures that he gave to the Fine Arts Department during Joe Burke's professorship. A short course on primitive art taken by 10 students. I don't know for how long this went on, but maybe from Joe arrived in Australia in 46, so perhaps 48 to 58, something like that, for about a decade. And we have some of the texts, pages of the texts, but not the total lectures, and the numbers on the slides seem to relate to these. I think, as sophisticated Europeans in a blokish Australian university after the war, they must have felt a real affinity, and you get that feeling in the correspondence. They're sort of helping one another and explaining to one another what to do in Australia. And Joe Burke was, as you all know, the first Herald Chair of Fine Arts, and he was a quite amazing teacher. I'm losing all my notes. Anyway, let's go on. Now, on Leonhard Adam's retirements, there are a lot of notes in the archives about what he'd done, not with as much detail as you'd always want to know, but I just put one quote I thought was pretty interesting. Adam was a generous friend to the Fine Arts Department, always willing to show his collections to students and his introductory lectures on prehistoric art, which was something of an annual event. He had the gift of firing enthusiasm. And that's a pretty nice testimony. And Joe never lied, and he never, I don't think, and he was really always very perceptive in the way he encouraged his colleagues. And there are other nice things that emerge and could be said. But it was, I think, a more important friendship than the one with Max Crawford, who also taught me, I remember. These are some of the slides that we have in the department. I thank Jane for preparing this image for us. This is this shows you, this is his handwriting, I think, isn't it, Mary-Clare? Oh, anyway, an excellently drawn mammoth, particularly the prehistoric extremities of the trunk. And here you have this, you see, he's copying for his slides, he's copying images and drawings. And that I think has an enormous impact as a teacher. I was trying to ask myself the question, maybe I'll ask you all a question for afterwards, you know, why do you draw something? And in the 19th century, people like Ruskin or Cavalcaselli or someone like would say you really got to know a work of art by drawing it well. That excludes me probably, but you can sort of see that's part of the technique, that they're doing things. Now, very shortly after he arrived in Melbourne and got out of Tatura, his task that was given to him by Max Crawford was to catalogue the stone implements in the Museum of Victoria, the Aboriginal stone implements. But he, almost within a few weeks, met Darrell Lindsay, who had also just been appointed to the NGV. And together they hatched this plan of having this first exhibition of primitive art. And here from the Public Record Office are the notes that Leonhard Adam made in his proposal to Darrell Lindsay for the exhibition. And it's quite clear that he intended to create a comparative exhibition of primitive art forms from different continents, unlike any other ever realised anywhere. I mean, he was nothing if not ambitious. And it was unique not only to Australia, but also to the world. This is the cover of the art exhibition, primitive art exhibition. And here's Darrell Lindsay, and on the right, one of the first reviews by Elkin, who was a very distinguished archaeologist of Aboriginal stuff in Sydney. Now, it's a drawing by Adam on the cover. And in that proposal, he says at the end, if you want to have illustrations, he says, I'll lend a hand. and some of the, in this little catalogue, some of the drawings are by his hand, but there are also photographs, rather dingy and sort of not very nice looking photographs, so you can sort of see why he may have drawn everything. I've been, in preparation for this lecture, I was rather diligent and approached the Museum of Victoria and asked them if you could perhaps reconstruct the exhibition, because it's quite hard to identify what was in it, apart from the things that he drew and photographed. And they said, well, that'd be a PhD subject to do that, because it's not entirely clear what was in it. But I'm also rather interested in Sidney Nolan at the moment, and this is an unpublished letter to someone called Ronald Anderson, not a relative, and which Nolan sort of shows the impact of what this exhibition was all about. I was down last week to put some pictures in for the Contemporary Art Society annual show, and went to the gallery to see the primitive art show. Lots of good stuff there, particularly some work from New Guinea, which was new to me. Some of the carvings showing a remarkable and complex development. In fact, one of them was a strange and lovely figure, which in the usual way would have been left as a solid block, but had been cut through almost in the manner of lace, which is the first instance I have seen in which our native art has gone already past significant understanding and almost massive penetration. It's a bit hard to sort of follow, but anyway. And then this is the good line. Adam has made a good job of it. He seems the chap who can probably do something about putting our blacks on the market in a better fashion than we have able to do so far. And Nolan had not been written about very much yet, about his relationship to Indigenous art, but there's quite a lot. Now, among Leonhard Adam's many, many writings, one that has often been discussed is this article he wrote for Angry Penguins, Has Australian Aboriginal Art a Future? And it appeared in an edition of Angry Penguins, which is perhaps more famous for the Malley scandal, this literary scam that happened. So in a way, the article didn't at the time receive as much attention as it might have been expected. But it's the first time the first time anyone has publicly suggested that Aboriginals should create works of art that would be in every Australian home. And it's interesting that later on there were several exhibitions at the NGV and the Museum of Victoria about Indigenous art, and David Jones, the great department store, had these extraordinary exhibitions of Indigenous work. And it's part of a trend in which Nolan was also involved. These are illustrations from Adam's article for Angry Penguins. There were no drawings. And in John Reed's correspondence, John Reed was also involved in all of this, he has a rather self-deceptive comment to himself about how he told Leonhard Adam what to do about Indigenous arts, which is sort of rather funny. But and he also insisted on illustrations, not drawings. So that's sort of interesting, I think. I wanted to identify the object that caught Nolan's attention, and I'm very grateful to Jade Hadfield, the curator of the First Nations peoples at the Museum of Victoria, for her help in identifying this as one of the two objects that he was very taken by. It's a ceremonial board. This is another one from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which wasn't in the exhibition, but it just shows you the beauty of the work. And Jade apologises to you that the image isn't a better photograph, but she did it as a courtesy with a handheld iPhone, as we all work these days. And then, of course, towards the end of his life, he was working on a huge book for Pevsner on primitive arts, and it never got published. This is a drawing he did for it, an extraordinarily beautiful drawing. And when you look at the first Nolan drawing of Indigenous art, which I think is Croker Island imagery, these birds in the eyes are the names of birds in Croker Island. I wonder if Nolan didn't actually even look at Leonhard Adam's drawings. That's a question. That's it from me, but I thought you might like to see how I got to these points. There are sort of some super articles by Adam and Sloggett on Roland Carter and Leonhard Adam, the first contact that he had with Indigenous art. And there's Adam and Sloggett on history of Indigenous art in the university collections. Greg Denning, who was one of his pupils, he had quite interesting pupils who went to these lectures, who went on and did interesting things. Ken Inglis's biography, which I thought was a bit disappointing when I reread it, I don't know what to say, because he did rather take the view that Mulvaney knew all about Leonhard Adam, whereas I don't think he did. And I think Leonhard Adam was terribly popular with the art lot, but maybe not so much with the historians. And then there's Benjamin Thomas's brilliant article on Darrell Lindsay and the appreciation of Indigenous art in Australia. And he has a very good section in that article about how Leonhard Adam met Darrell Lindsay, sort of, and it's really very, very interesting about how the exhibition came about. Then there's something by myself. I gave a lecture at the Musée du Quai Branly on some material I found. Kenneth Clark, when he was in Australia, very briefly, knew Leonhard Adam, and he was a great mate of Joe Burke's. And Kenneth Clark wrote this letter to Berenson saying, the best thing in Australia is Indigenous art, but no one knows anything about it, and no one studies it. And that's a sort of interesting thing to have said, I suppose. And then Mary-Clare Adam's catalogue on his work as an artist, the only thing that's been published to date on him. So this is a very modest contribution from an art historian, seeing how I see things from this perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jaynie. Thank you for sharing your expertise and your knowledge so willingly. I note at the start that you said you didn't feel much of an expert, but I think the talk rather contradicted that. So thank you very much. I think we have maybe 10 or 15 minutes for questions for either Jaynie or Mary-Clare, but I might ask, Jane Brown is here, isn't she?
She's up there.
Up the back. Would you like to make some comments on the slides, Jane? I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you...
Take the microphone.
I'm completely fascinated by that period of the Dunera. I run the Art History Library at Melbourne University, and those connections with the Dunera through Franz Philipp, of course, Leonhard Adam. And yeah, these 80 slides came to me via the Ian Potter Museum in two little black boxes with Leonhard Adam written across the top. And what's really very moving about them is the there's pencil inscriptions on the sides of the slides that describe the colours of the artworks, because they're all in black and white. So the slides that Jaynie put up, you know, with the projectors and so forth, I at the time wondered if he'd actually carried them across from England, but there's absolutely no way that could have happened by the sounds of it. Yes, he managed to get his watercolours, but I don't think the slides, a lot of them are in German inscriptions, so I presume he made them up from books. We had what was called the Visual Aids Department at the university at the time, so I suspect they were all made up for his classes.
He did a lot of drawings in the Museum of Victoria.
Yes, so those drawings
From
were
and the Baldwin Spencer collection was permanently on view in the hall.
so
Yes,
presumably...
I don't think much
those-
survived on the Dunera.
No, which is, yeah, it's extraordinary. And that leads me, did he know Franz Philipp? Was he...
I don't know about that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
probably. He must have.
He must have.
They
yeah,
were
yeah.
at
I mean, they were
Tatura
both at
together,
yeah,
and yes, and Kitzinger too.
Yeah. And the other person with my photography background, I find quite interesting that the first person who wrote the history of photography, Helmut Gernsheim, was also in, and his name doesn't often come up. You might have come across it on your research, but he went back to England and back to the Courtauld to take photographs of artworks. So that's an interesting connection.
Seumas has interviewed so many of the Dunera survivors,
Yeah,
and he's a wealth of information.
Yes, well, I'll have to hit you up on Gernsheim.
Helmut Gernsheim actually had a relative. Had a relative on the Dunera who was Erwin Fabian, who was distinguished Australian artist, who Jaynie
And
as well.
he was a great friend of Franz's.
Two microphones.
Yeah, you need to. One is for the recording and one is for.
Okay, sorry, I'm not used to this. Yeah, so I don't think I can add much more, but yes, I just really want to thank you all. It's just been so enlightening, and I can now look at those slides with a bit more knowledge and understanding. Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you very much.
Seumas, sorry.
Yes.
Can I quickly make a comment to that, to Jane's comment, that my father worked very closely with Department of Visual Aids, and there was a man working in there called David Cork. Does that name ring a bell?
Yes, I think he was an RAF pilot in the war, and he set up the department. I think Ben,
And
an RAF pilot, I believe, and he set up the department just after the war. And I think Ben Thomas has actually written a bit about him as well. Yeah, so he would have worked. He would have been a busy man. Some of the slides.
extremely busy, very difficult to nail down, I remember. And David Cork came with us to Alice Springs in 1955 when we made our epic trip to document recently rediscovered Aboriginal rock paintings near Alice Springs. David Cork was on that trip.
Oh, wow. That's great. That's
So would those slides be, would the photographs be in the department? Maybe.
Maybe. That might be worth a look. Yep. A lot went to the Potter, but yeah, I'm not quite sure why this little batch came to us, but those ones might be. So, do you know if they were 35mm or the ones that we have are all 2 1/4 inch? So I don't know. Can't hear. Yep. Do you know if the slides were 35mm ones or were they with the bigger glass?
They would have been, I think. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. I can check.
Thank you, Jane. Thank
you.
And
No,
sorry for putting you on the spot.
No, it's thank you.
Any other? Do we have questions? Leon. So Leon up the back, and then we'll come up the front.
2 microphones. Phonic sound. Nice to meet you, Mary-Clare Adam. We've been in correspondence. Thank you, Jaynie. I have an observation, apart from the fact that it's great to see you. 2 frustrations. One is that the exhibition at the Potter Gallery, 65,000 years of Indigenous art, states that Leonhard was a refugee from Europe, came to Australia. Well, he was an enemy alien. He was not a refugee. He was deported to Australia unwillingly as an enemy alien. And that should be corrected. It's acknowledged, but it's there. I'm sure you've observed that. It's historical untruth. The second is a frustration that I have been looking for probably a year and a half for Leonhard Adam's lecture that he gave when he was the vice rector of Collegium Tatarense, the University College in Tatura, which is on the importance of science. And it's there in the program for that event, the anniversary of the college. And you look in the Boomerang, which was the newspaper in that camp, about the events and the issues that would have been either that week or the week after or the fortnight after are missing. Now, where can we find them? I've looked in the Jewish Museum of Australia. I'm wondering whether there's any copy of it in Len's archives, because it's a real mystery.
Do you
It
know?
would be wonderful to be found, because I'm sure that they are remarkable words given on an occasion in which your father would have been, so wise and would give us a lot of wisdom about what is the importance of science. Thank you.
I haven't come across them. There are some pages in the University of Melbourne archives of his lectures, but they're about art, but they're not complete. They're just fragments, which is most frustrating. Oh, is this Glenn Shee?
Hello, how you going?
Hi.
Hi. How you doing?
Fine. Well, this is a man who has written a play about Leonhard Adam's encounter with Lord Carter, and he's just appeared.
Yes.
So you can't contradict anything I said.
Never. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's very nice to see you here. And it was a play at La Mama.
Correct.
And many of you may have seen it. It was terrific. And I believe he's going to publish the play, and it was most memorable and interesting.
Yes. Mary-Clare, his daughter.
That's
hello, Mary-Clare.
She's online
Hi,
from
Glenn.
Vienna.
Well, I won't say anything about Mary-Clare. Yes.
I might just add, Leon, most of the Dunera men were refugees and enemy aliens, so both labels apply to most men. And that's the legal definition. Carol Bunyan, who you know, the marvellous Carol Bunyan's been through that. Not every Dunera man was a refugee, according to international law, but most were.
Was Leonhard?
I would have to check, but I suspect so.
Really?
Actually, there's some documentation that he should never have been put in the Isle of Man prison. That was a mistake. And so I don't know about the terminology for this, but it was a mistake that he was sent on the Dunera.
Yes.
And that's quite well documented.
And that's the point.
Oh, okay, well.
That is the point.
Well, and then, of course, once he was in Tatura, this Christian organisation wrote and got him out. It had more to do with them than with the man who was warden of Queen's at the time, according to the documentation I've seen. But I'm not a real expert on this, I will bow to anything you say.
Oh, sorry, the lady here was first.
I just wondered,
Maybe just a second.
One is recording and one is...
I was just wondering whether Leonhard Adam was aware of that expedition it was Australian expedition to the...
In 48.
To the Northern Territory.
In 48, yeah.
In 48, yes.
He must have been.
I would have thought so, but there was nothing.
He was so well connected.
That's right.
I mean, obviously everyone who is intelligent and knowledgeable liked him.
But it's not mentioned that he was...
There's a lot of things that aren't mentioned. We're just waiting for that biography.
Because that was a very well-known expedition, and there was a lot of controversy about it, in fact.
Yes, well, I mean, we don't... Leonhard Adam, as Glenn will tell you, was sort of working away at these things since 1918, and that hasn't been known about recently. But since Glenn Shea's play has made it much more public, that's well known. I think the whole reception and understanding of Indigenous art is very complex, and there are a lot of bits in it, and it's sort of better if you're Indigenous to write about it, I feel. I might have felt once that I could write about it, but I think it's much better to have an Indigenous voice writing about it now. And that's understandable.
Someone else had their hand up? Ah, yeah, the gentleman at the back.
I don't know if it's a gentleman, but I certainly had my hand up. As a bit of an aside, about 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and about 30 kilos ago, I used to run with Franz Namfel, who was one of the few non-Jews on the Dunera. He was actually competed in the 1936 Olympics, and at the beginning of the Nuremberg laws, he saw the closing of the Jewish businesses and the boycotting, and became a conscientious objector and actually moved to England. And he was actually interned as an enemy alien and came out on the Dunera, and a lot of the Jewish refugees actually used to give him their belongings on Shabbat, so that they wouldn't have to carry their watches and whatever. And so when a lot of people here would know he had a green shed behind the running track, and I ended up knowing him through my father, who was his doctor. But so the point being is that, and he himself was also an artist, which he had as a hobby, but the point being was that the Dunera and the people at the Hay and Tatura, he used to have athletics and train people as well. But the point is that he was a conscientious objector to the Nazis. He was Austrian, and the Dunera was 99% Jewish, wasn't only Jewish people as well. There were the non-Jewish people there as well that were sent out here.
The percentage of non-Jews on the Dunera is actually much higher.
Yeah.
It's about 80% were Jewish, but of those 80%, many of them didn't know they were Jewish until Hitler told them. So the percentage of practicing or observant Jews was quite low, but the men of actual Jewish heritage, it's about 80%. Yeah, but you're right. It's an important point that's often forgotten. I mean, there were Catholic priests on the Dunera, so there's another interesting aspect to Stanford, and thank you for raising him. If you walk on the path outside the Bailey Library at the University of Melbourne, there's sort of plaques to distinguished past students or past teachers, and there's a plaque for, not a plaque, but set into the pavement, there's something for Franz Stanford, who coached Roger Bannister to the 4-minute mile and then came back to Australia. Yeah. Yes.
Wow.
It's a plaque.
Tonya, do you not have something to say?
Oh, I was engrossed by everything that you and Mary-Clare have said today.
Okay.
And Mary-Clare, is there anything you would like to ask someone or would like to see? Can you see everyone well, or can? First of all, I mean, we looked forward to have you here last time, and then you were not well, and so I'm really, really happy that at least we can, in some type of form through Zoom, can have you at the library, and everyone can enjoy your wonderful presence here. So it's really special for us, even though you're not in Melbourne, you are with us today. So if you let us know if you can see well, if you want to ask someone a question or...
Yes, first of all, Mirav, thank you so much for making this possible. I had been terribly, terribly sorry that I wasn't able to make the trip to Australia in July. And you've given me this opportunity this evening for you and this morning for me. And really, I'm immensely grateful to you for that. There is someone I'd like to ask something of, and that is, Glenn Shea, who came, and he's at the back, I believe.
Yes, come forward.
Can you
Don't be shy.
you can sit here. Maybe.
Oh, thank you. That's really cool. I'm very humbled and honoured to be here amongst you all this evening and in your house. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, you can sit here.
He doesn't need a microphone.
We want to record you, so that's
Ooh.
recording, and that you have a loud voice. You don't need the
Okay.
microphone.
So,
You
can
can see her.
I just wanted to say that it's thanks to some detective work that I did in the University of Vienna a few years ago and discovered the article that my father had published he published it in
Can we
1923
go
or
back on this?
1924, but it was based on his interviews with Roland Carter and to a certain extent Douglas Grant at the prisoner of war camp in Wunstorf outside Berlin. It was published about the way of life of Ngarrindjeri people, and Roland Carter revealed to my father that all kinds of things customs were still being practiced there, whereas the missionary of the time had said, oh, this is great, everything's been wiped out. But Roland Carter told my father absolutely not, everything was still going on. My father published it, and I knew he'd published it, but I didn't know exactly where that copy was until by chance I met the professor of comparative law at the University of Vienna, and he said, come to our library and let's look. And I found it and immediately copied it, sent it to Robin Sloggett, who immediately sent it to Glenn Shea, and voila, we have this incredible, wonderful play that I hope very much may be turned into an opera before long.
Wow.
Glenn, how is it going?
I think that is very exciting. In regards to it becoming an opera is very exciting because Roland Carter is my direct blood relation, Ngarrindjeri from Raukin in South Australia, and a lot of our old people would sing opera in the early days and things like that. So this kind of next stage of the story, it being made into opera, and is going to be really interesting how it comes from your perspective, Mary-Clare, and Caitlin Hillcup there in Austria as well, and how it develops there. But the continuation of the journey of, because the story that we shared is a story of friendship between Roland and Leonard, but the story now we're developing is their journeys. So of Roland's journey to the POW camp, and Leonard's journey to the POW camp, and Leonard's journey to here in Australia, to Tatura, to Melbourne University, to then his journey onwards, because, you know, we believe that the friendship that they created within the POW camp was really an intellectual friendship built on each other's knowledge, and so therefore each other shared their knowledge, etc. And so a lot of Leonard's work in Australia in connection to Aboriginal art and his associates, etc., is connected to those conversations that he had with Roland in the POW camp and the friendship that they built. But yes, I'm very excited about the opera. I'm just kind of, yes. Yes.
And I could say that it was most likely due to my father's friendship with Roland that his whole interest in Aboriginal culture and then Aboriginal art began and it evolved.
Yes.
All due to that meeting in that prisoner of war camp in 1918.
Yes. Yes. And it's an extraordinary story. You know, Leonard is such, I just find him extraordinary, and his intellect and, you know, his knowledge that covers so much of that and I hope this is the right word, the Western canon of academia in all the things that he was a specialist in that regards, and how Roland in return was able to share his cultural knowledge from country at that time, which was changing policies from in regards to the churches, etc., from reserves to the missions to then the system and the government. So when he came home, it had totally changed from when he went. So very interesting. Yeah, I hope that made sense.
Well, I hope it does become an opera. I was fortunate enough to see the play and it was superb. So, and I hope many of you did get to see it. So congratulations on that.
Thank
too,
you.
So.
I'd love it if you had some of Leonhard Adam's watercolours in the opera, or something about, you know, his visual stuff. Look
His
at
watercolours are extraordinary.
them, aren't they?
Yes. Yes, and hopefully we'll be able to plant the seeds of the watercolours within the next stage of the development of the story. So the story that you witnessed is kind of, for me now, the second act, whereas we have the first and the third act, so it'll kind of be a 3-hour journey, so a real lived experience of their journeys. Yeah, but and have all those
That's
watercolours.
divine, that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think, Anthony?
Beautiful.
You're very quiet.
I think
I want to say thank you to everyone, but Mary-Clare is still here. So if people would like to come and talk to her personally, you can come next to the computer and have a conversation with her after if that's okay. Is that okay? Yes, for you?
Absolutely.
So maybe we will stop here, and I want to say thank you to everyone, and let us know about the opera.
Yes, absolutely. We're in deep research at the moment for right across the board. So yes, and there I have art centres that are interested in producing the story that you saw, but producing also the bigger story as well. So we have the 2, maybe 3 different versions.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so thank you everyone who came, and thank you everyone who did such a wonderful job.